Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Supernatural, the latest episode of Legacies, as well as the latest episode of Evil. Like always, if I'm talking about something you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include a time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I say about this week's episode of Supernatural, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Legacies, and/or skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Evil. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of Supernatural. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, I think Dean is getting a little stir crazy because it's like with everything that's happened, obviously, like for him for so long, it's like still the thing of like so much of their lives feel out of control. So for him, he's looking for a case. It's like we need to work on and do something to kind of feel like we're doing something, that there was a matter of it. So even if it's something small, he needs to have some win, because it's just like finding out that Chuck's still alive. Obviously last episode and everything, we saw that he was kind of beat down. He almost just didn't really care about anything. He didn't leave or any, it wasn't until like the whole situation with Sam and Eileen came up last episode that he really kind of stepped up. But it was just kind of like he was in a bit of a funk, and now he's trying to shake it off. Obviously he doesn't want Sam to worry, so he's just like, no, I'm just going to clear my head, when in actuality he's trying to work on a case, because if he says he's working on a case, Sam's going to want to go. And I think for him it's like he wants Sam to be happy, because it's like, oh, you and Eileen, like the fact of the matter is, it's like, oh yeah, we got some stuff we do together. He's like, oh, I bet. He's like, Sam's like, it's not like that. Dean's like, sure, leave a sock out so I'll know ahead of time. Not, it's like, shut up, Dean. It's that type of situation. But I did like, Dean is investigating this case. I love that sheriff he met. He's like, oh yeah, kids run away. They tried to go off to Hollywood, be on those reality competition shows, like the one with Knight Rider. And it was like, at first I was trying to think like, what the hell was he talking about? But I guess he was referencing, has David Hasselhoff been on a competition, like the judge on a competition show? Is that what that was referencing? I don't know. But regardless, like that dude seemed kind of goofy and stuff like that. But he's like, hey, if you run into those kids about, they went out into Hollywood and stuff like that, but you should also think about yourself. You got the face for it. And Dean's almost like, yeah, thanks. And I just love that. And the sheriff just seems like a goofy dude. I was wondering if he's going to be a bigger part of the episode. It turns out to be the case. But what's interesting is while investigating this, he ends up at a bar called Swayze's, which I'm immediately like, as in like Patrick Swayze, because I've never seen the movie, but I figured it would be like, that's probably like a reference to Roadhouse, I would assume, which he starred in that movie. So I was wondering if that was the correlation there, because Roadhouse was like a bar, if I'm not mistaken. Like I said, I've never seen the movie. I've seen bits and pieces, but just never the actual movie itself. Regardless, he ends up running into a buddy of his, Lee. I did not correlate it until I saw him, because I saw the name Christian Kane at the beginning, but it didn't correlate in my head until I saw him. I was like, oh my God, Christian Kane, of course. Which, there are some deep cuts when you actually think about this in the grand scheme of things. All right, I'm about to run through some stuff. For one, the thing I best know him from was Angel. That's my first introduction. Obviously, another thing was the TV show Leverage. I think prior to this, the last thing he was working on was the TV show Librarians, which... there's a lot of things to kind of think about. Something I didn't even think about, it took me a second to think about, was Aldous Hodge, who was one of his fellow co-stars in Leverage, was in Supernatural. He was in season 2. He might have popped up before then, but he was one of Yellow Eyes' like people like Sam, like people with demon blood that kind of have powers and stuff like that. That was that whole thing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But it's also interesting CW wise is that one of his fellow co-stars in The Librarians is the actor who played Greg on the show Pandora. So I'm going on a tangent and all that, but I love like piecing stuff together. Be like, oh, that's so interesting. Like I overthink that stuff all the time. Nothing new there, but still. You could definitely tell immediately that Lee and Dean were kind of like cut from the same cloth, because they act a little like each other. But I thought it was kind of interesting. I guess it's one of those things that just like you lose touch with other people. It's like he's a hunter and everything. Because I figured as much. The moment he was like Dean Winchester, I was like, oh, you must be a hunter. He didn't even know that their dad, that John was dead, which was interesting. Because even Dean was like, yeah, has he been going for 13? I'm like, yeah, that's kind of interesting. You wouldn't know that. I guess, I don't know. I guess because of all the Winchester stuff, you would assume that word would have gotten out over these past 13 years that their dad their dad was gone. But maybe because Lee isn't a part of the hunting world anymore, he kind of settled down, got this bar and everything. I was like, oh. And I think that's kind of a nice element to have, because obviously for Sam and Dean, trying to stop the hunting life has never worked for them. It's always been a momentary thing, and then just something will always come up. They end up dragging it back into it because it's almost like trying to fight your destiny. It's like this is what the path you're meant to go down, and there's almost like no fighting it. But I think the other comparison to see like, hey, there's this guy who's literally left his job behind for a long period of time. But it turns into that whole, and I think it kind of gets even Dean thinking, because he's like, do you miss it? And Lee was like, not a second, and so, because it's like, because it's even like, oh, like, because even Dean is saying that basically the outlook of this job, there's no quitting this job, you just end up dead. That's all there is to it. And I was like, and even Lee's kind of it's a bit of a somber like thing, but it's like most hunters don't retire. Most hunters just end up dying. Like you do good, but then eventually one day no matter how good you are, you'll eventually get got type of situation. Someone or something will eventually get you type of situation. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. But immediately I start thinking like, Lee was suspicious because I was like, it seemed like, because at the moment he's like, oh yeah, this girl, I'm not really sure, and then his like one of the bartenders, she's like, no, like her, she comes in all the time, and he had a couple, like, oh yeah, the one that doesn't really drink, like that. And then when it came down to like, oh, where would be a place that, he's like, by the lake, and then she's like, oh, but what about a junkyard? Like I was like, yep, you're behind all this, you have to be, because you're super like reluctant to like really take a step forward and everything. Like, it seemed like you were almost trying to impede the investigation, and we kind of find out why, because basically he gave up the whole hunting thing, and it's sad because like he did that only to kind of basically turn people into praise. That basically he had captured a monster. It was the last job he had worked on, and basically you feed this thing enough feed it blood, it will basically give you money and good health. It's almost like a good fortune type of creature or whatever. And even Dean's like, I can't believe you did this. You're murdering people to do this. And for him, it's the thing of like, it's like, come on, after all the good we've done, like how many people have you saved? It was a whole conversation beforehand, not this particular conversation, but like how many people do you think you've saved? Hundreds, thousands? Like, and at the end, it's almost like, it still kind of all folds into the same conversation of like, there's no winning this. And so for him, it's like, why not just kind of clock out and get my, even if I have to sacrifice people, I deserve this, which Dean was immediately offended because it's like, no, there's no deserving this. There's no like, oh, like I have a right to this, I have to deserve this. It's like, no, the fact is you do the work. This work isn't about being rewarded, because, especially for Dean, knowing like how much him and Sam have lost over the course of this series, how much they've lost being hunters and everything. And yes, it's a thankless job, but for them, it is a thing of, hey, people still need to be saved. We're here to protect those people. But obviously for Lee, that kind of got lost along the way because rather than looking out for other people, he came looking out for himself. So he's apologizing to, Dean, but it's like, if it comes down to you and me, I'm going to choose basically me every time. So it's kind of sad being portrayed by someone you looked up as a friend. Now, this is someone he grew up with because he was like, yo, like stories that him and John were talking about between him and, Lee and Dean about, John and, music and stuff like that. Hell, they even just had their like duet on stage and everything, and they killed it. And it's just, it's kind of sad. But when the time came, it's like it turned into a little bit of a shootout, but then it's like they both ran out of bullets, and it's like he's asking Dean to basically just walk away from this, but Dean, it's like, I'm sorry, buddy, but I can't. He's like, I hunt monsters, and Lee kind of looks like almost kind of offended, like, wait, you're calling me a monster? It's like, well, truth be told is, yeah, you are. Use that monster to, kill people for your own benefit. So if that doesn't make you a monster, I don't know what will. So, and then it proceeds to turn into a slug out between the two. So, obviously, Dean ends up, winning the fight and ends up killing Lee. And Lee's like, at the end of the day, he was like, why do you, despite all of this, like, why do you keep going? Why do you keep fighting like this? Why do you try that? Why do you, because for Lee, it was like, there's no good or evil and stuff like that, which Dean, especially because it's like, who are you to kind of make judgments like that? You're not God. Hell, not even God is God right now because, what they're going through recently. So that's, the perspective that Dean's coming from. But for him, like, that inspires him even more to keep doing what they're doing, because it's like, if I don't do good, who else? If I don't do this, who else is going to do it? So that's what pushes him to keep doing this, because it's not like the world has God looking out for them, because it turns out like everything has been all part of some little game for him. So there's that whole situation. So, and I think it probably hurts Dean to see that he does kill someone that was a buddy of his, but if it meant stopping him from doing evil, it's kind of like, yeah, I think this whole adventure probably got a little more pep in his step in the sense of recognizing like, no matter what happens, we do in fact do good. And it's like, no matter what, that's what we're here to do, because if we don't do this job, no one else will, and so many more people will die. So despite even the complicated thing of like God still being in the picture, controlling our lives, like, I still got to do this. Which obviously we go into the other side of things, which like, hey, Sam and Eileen are there alone in a bunker. I like the fact is that they're giving each other the eyes, like they're looking at each other, and then when their eyes lock, they kind of smile at each other, being like super awkward and everything. And it's like, oh, she's like, this is kind of melting my mind. So it's like, why don't we do something fun? He's like, you got an idea? She's like, well, I got a couple. And it's like, oh, I was almost halfway expecting, because like the look on Sam's face, I was almost thinking he was going to turn her down. I was like, don't do that. Because I think for him, I would think just because of everything that's going down recently, like maybe make you a little scared to kind of take that step forward, because he hasn't been with anyone. I think the last time he was in a relationship was season 8, right? I'm blanking on her name, but she was a lady that while Dean was in purgatory, Sam had settled down for a little bit. I think that's the last time Sam was in a relationship. I could be wrong, but regardless. And to be fair, we already know that him and Eileen kind of already had something beforehand, and now they're able to kind of pick that up, which even now I'm just kind of like, oh, they're going to break our hearts by making that part of some twisted tragedy that, Chuck is setting up. I just know it. They're just kind of trying to lower our guards just when we think everything's going to be good and everything's okay. Because that happens. Every time the Winchesters get a little bit of happiness, eventually, even if it takes a season or two, it's eventually taken from them. But this being the final season, it means all that happiness is going to be taken away just that quickly. It's like you'll get it that fast and you'll lose it just as quickly, just because, once again, Chuck's twisted plan. But Sam surprises me, and he grabs her hand, and it almost seemed like he was going to lean in to kiss her. And Cassio, having the terrible timing he does, he shows up and he gets introduced. Eileen's like, "Wait, weren't you dead?" She's like, "Yeah, we've remedied that situation." So that's interesting. So now, because of the whole bullet situation, the whole wound situation that Sam has, Cassio has the thought of like, basically the gun basically had a piece of his own soul came with the bullet. So there's a piece of his soul in Chuck, hence why they have the connection. So it's like, if we pry into that connection, into that wound, we could probably like find out where Chuck is and everything. But when they do, Sam ends up getting hurt. So Castiel calls in the one person he knows too, and that's Sergei. And I love that he's immediately kind of not dealing with Sergei's crap of like, the fact of the matter is, it's like, if you don't come here and help Sam, I'm going to track you down and basically kill you myself. And it's like, oh, this is a different side of you, Cassio. And Cassio just immediately hangs up. But then he calls someone else behind, and we don't find out till later on that was Bobby he called. But we'll get to that soon. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, what was that about? Like, I figured he has some other ace in the hole just in case this whole Sergei thing didn't play out. But basically, Sergei shows up saying that basically because of what Cassio was doing, basically the connection has already stretched Sam's soul. His soul is kind of rubber banding between the two places, between Chuck and himself. But the fact of the matter is, because of trying to pry deeper, that rubber band has stretched out even more until eventually it's going to pop and it's going to end up killing Sam in the process. Which makes you wonder, would that have any effect on Chuck? I wonder, would actually Sam dying actually be better for Chuck? Or because of where they are right now, could it be a thing of Sam dies, Chuck dies? Could that be potential? I mean, that might even be the route they end up going down with this. I don't know. There's essentially, it might be a thing kind of similar to, Preacher, how like the Saint of Killers didn't have a soul until Jesse gave him a part of his soul, making it so that Genesis could work on him. Maybe it's kind of a similar thing where God technically doesn't have a soul, but now he has a soul because Sam is connected to him. So it's like, now because that soul is kind of his, like he can potentially die. Well, I mean, because Death said years and years and years ago in this show, the Death that existed before Billy, the one that Dean ended up killing in season 10, that particular Death, he had talked about reaping, God. I feel like I made reference to that. Was it this season or was that last season I made a reference to that? Regardless, so it's, it's not like this situation would make it possible for him to die. It's like, no, he was already in a position. Well, I don't know, because even Death was kind of saying like, oh, we can rape God even back before God got all, before God is in the, Chuck was in the weakened state that he's in. No, I think that kind of speaks volumes. But regardless, but then we got getting back on the main point of everything. That, like I said, that's just future talk. We'll cross that lane when we get there, but. Basically, Sergei's being a piece of crap, which, hey, no surprise there. he ends up trying to threaten Sam. It's like, oh yeah, basically made the wound worse, and if you want me to heal him, you need to give me something. So basically, it's like a death key is what he was looking for. He says it can basically open up. I forgot what it was exactly he was saying. It could open up, but the fact is that was kind of a plot point left open. Of like they made such a point referencing that. It's like maybe it is just an item that he wanted, and there's never going to be anything else about that. But I'm like, since they brought that item up, either Sergei's going to try and find some other means to get it, or that item in particular is going to be like later on when they're going to need something, Castiel's going to remember this particular death key, and he's like, oh, we can use that. And so that might be what that ends up turning into. We'll see, but. Cassio wasn't about to play that game. It's like, oh no, we're not going to do. I did like that. Eileen was like, if you don't cure him, I will kill you myself. But it's like, nah. Oh, see, this picture is of your niece. It was taken by an associate of mine. If you don't help Sam, things are going to get bad. I was like, whoa. And even Sergei, after he healed Sam, he was actually impressed. He was like, oh, this new Cassio I like. He's like, it's very Russian of you. And I was like, huh. I guess because it's the thing of like, Cassio has been, he realizes that you got to, kind of go with the more like iron fist tactics if you want to get something done, if you don't want to get played, because I guess, especially more recently of like being played and put in a position where it's like you need countermeasures set up just ahead of time. I mean, to be fair, you already knew ahead of time not to trust Sergei, but obviously recently with, what was this, Balthagon? What was home dude's name? The one that had, I'm blanking on it now, the dude who had possessed, Jack's body. That demon, like he had his old plans of trying to absorb all the souls and everything earlier, right? So I probably after that most recent betrayal, like it's like that becoming a last minute thing you had to deal with. It's probably like, plus Sergei being Sergei, Cassio knew ahead of time to be like, oh, we got to do that. So granted, now Sam has looked into, while he was in that condition, he looked into Chuck. He saw Chuck typing away. He probably doesn't know exactly what Chuck wrote for them, so he probably doesn't know exactly what's coming. But he did remember that Chuck met with Amara, but the fact is Amara wouldn't help him, talking about how weak of a state he's in and stuff like that. So now it's like, we can take him down. We can kill God. He's in a state where he doesn't have as much power. So now, if we're going to strike, now is the time. So that's a little, I'm sure that once again, like what Dean went through this episode, I don't know if he's actually going to bring that up to Sam or Cassio, which obviously it's like, oh, Cass, I got your messages and everything. Is Sam okay? He's like, yeah, he is. He's recovering. It's like, oh, okay. And then immediately they kind of walk separate ways. It's kind of like, things are still awkward, where it seems like Dean's almost falling back into fashion of like, oh yeah, everything's good, but obviously Cassio is still kind of like roughed up about what Dean said. There's still underlining issues there that they have to deal with, and I think maybe Dean's also coming from this perspective after having dealt with Lee. It's like, despite the issues I have with Cassio, he would never do something terrible like that. He might have made mistakes and there have been complicated situations, but he's never done something as monstrous as what Lee did. So I think maybe that puts kind of shifts where he stands with Castiel a little bit in his head. Regardless, like I said, we'll have to see, but I'm interested to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of Legacies. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's talk about the fact is, obviously because of Landon being in a very interesting particular situation he's in, it's caused a lot of complications, because there's the whole, I love that, like, you have Lizzie trying to bridge the gap between Hope and Josie, which is interesting, because that dynamic's a complete switcheroo from last season, because Josie kind of played peacekeeper between the two of them, but now Lizzie has to play that role because both of them are both in love with the same person. And now it's the whole thing of like, well, obviously, Lizzie's in a similar situation because she's mad at Sebastian because he was manipulating her, but also apparently he's going to be admitted to the school. To be fair, that was Vardamus who made that decision. We'll see what ends up happening later on, because Alaric is like, I got to check into this dude before I let him into the school, especially because it seems like he has a thing for Lizzie. But also she's pissed at MG because it's like, oh, MG lied and everything, which, you have Josie be like, you should give him a second chance. He would never meant to hurt you. He was trying to look out for you, which, Hope is like, I wasn't trying to hurt you, but it's like, yeah, got 0 points for that. It's kind of so. And I love Lizzie holding both of them. It's almost adorable because it's like, yeah, here are my two sisters. In a sense, I thought that was kind of a sweet situation. I also thought it was super adorable when Hope was going in to talk to Lark, and he's standing there for a couple of seconds, and then he hugs her. She's like, okay, what's this about? He's like, you told me your story, but now that my memories are all back, it's just, I'm happy to have you back. I'm like, the feels. It's too much. It's too good. I was like, oh, that's super sweet. You have Raphael spending so much time around Landon, because it's like, well, if the girls, if any, monsters get through the girls, I need to be here to look after you the entire time. It's like you're my brother, you're not my bodyguard. But for him, it's like he feels like he owes it to him, and Landon's like, you don't. But I think it's still in his mind because it's like when I didn't have my memories of Hope, I was kind of hitting on. So I think because it's like for him, it's like he already liked Hope, and then now on top of the fact is without his memories, he liked Hope and was trying to going down that lane. I think he kind of regrets it a little bit. So he's like, you know what, I kind of owe you. But I think it might not even be that. Maybe subconsciously thinking that without telling Landon, but it's probably also for the fact is that Landon looked after him all that time. So it's like me having your back, it's like it's only fair. Maybe it's a combination of all of it. Regardless, I just thought it was interesting. And obviously, Josie's trying to figure out, because obviously Hope gave her the crystal and she's using it to kind of manifest a Landon. And it's like, well, the fact of the matter is I need to know where your heart stands. And he's like, well, the fact of the matter is I'm just your subconscious. So the fact of the matter is we're not really going to get any answers out of this because I only know what you know. So they end up coming up with a plan that basically they work with Vardamus to basically make it so that they take the stone, the copy of Landon that's created from that stone. They basically implant his subconsciousness into it. They want to fill it up with Hope's blood as a tribrid and put that inside of Malivore and kill him that way without having to sacrifice Hope or give Landon to Malivore. So that was an interesting part. And the moment like Hope's about to go to New Orleans to kind of find a way to seal Malivore, and lo and behold, who shows up? Landon being like, oh my God, I love you. And she's like, I love you too. I'm like, what's about to happen here? And it's like, oh, she turns around and it's like, wait, there's two Landons. It's like, that's almost a very complicated asinine plan. I don't even love Lizzie pointing out being like, or you say that this is it, or maybe the real reason why you're doing this is because by separating his subconscious from him, you'll find out what Landon's not really talking, because Landon's not telling anybody. He's avoiding Hope and Josie because it's a super complicated situation, because obviously he does care about Josie a lot, but the fact of the matter is he also loves Hope. So it's like he's still trying to figure things out. And so I just thought, it's a very complicated situation, to be in. At the same time, the Sphinx pops up and everything, and I love he kind of gives an introduction and everything, and it's like, kind of a big deal. Most people kind of get shot, but like Hope is like, well, to be fair, it's been kind of a week, so that was kind of interesting. So all while they're dealing with that, there's a whole situation of Golem. What was it they called him? Was it pseudo Landon because he wasn't real? He was a substitute or a fake Landon. So I forgot what they called him, but the fake Landon, he's very like, he's kind of unfiltered. He's just kind of like, I love Hope. Michael said, I'm a screaming to the top. I love, and she has to use the spell to kind of shut him down. But even though you can tell there's a part of Hope that actually kind of liked it, because, she doesn't know where her and Landon stand. So they even hear a version, because I think it reminds her of all the time she talked to Landon, her own subconscious, but in the form of Landon. I think it kind of reminds her of that. So I think it brings her back to the time, but also hearing, knowing how she feels about Landon, and to hear that, knowing that, hey, maybe that's how you really feel, because that's what's in your head, which obviously that's an issue for Josie, because it's like, well, the first thing that Landon did the moment we separated his subconscious, what did he do? He ran off to Hope, and so it's like, for her, it's like, well, that kind of cements on where his mindset is on this whole situation. So, and I kind of felt bad for fake Landon too, because he's like, wait, I'm gonna be sacrificed, I'm gonna die. He's like, no one told me about that. And it's so interesting comparing that Landon to the real Landon, because it seems like the real Landon is not being as like, it feels like obviously fake Landon is a more quirky version. Like Landon's already a quirky dude, but I think fake him is even quirkier. And I think because of this whole Hope and Josie situation, he's not as quirky himself. He's just kind of very like resound. And so the entire time they're like filling Hope's blood into the fake Landon, the real Landon's not talking to her. She's like, the fact of the matter is you haven't really said anything since your memories came back and everything. And it's like, he's kind of, being a little short with her because obviously he's pissed at her because it's like, well, we're kind of in this situation because you helped, you didn't say anything. But it's like, to be fair, by the time she actually returned, she literally, I don't know if she actually explained that. The first thing she saw coming back when she came to look for you, she saw you kissing Josie. So it's like, what am I supposed to do? Be like, oh, hey, I know you and Josie are getting close, but hey, I'm here. I'm someone that you love. Like, yes, it might have been a misguided thing, but for Hope, it's like she wanted to protect you because it's like you had moved on. And obviously, I think Hope has that complicated thing of just like she's always kept her distance from people. And now that she's actually built relationships, she was afraid that, it's like, no, everyone's better off without me. But it's like, no one is. Everyone's better for having her in their lives, So then you have Alaric and Dorian finding out like, wait, Vardamus might not be who he says he is because his DNA showed up at the bar and everything. And I love it. It's like, oh, he's literally a whole bunch of everything. He's all these different ethnicities and gender. So it's like, and it's saying that he's 10% white, which we both know that's not true. I just love that line from Dorian for whatever reason. I was like, what? I love that line. But it's like, okay. And so all of that was the same readings as the Malivore pick because the Malivore is an amalgamation of everything it's ever absorbed, which it's absorbed all these different supernatural creatures and all that. So obviously it's going to read us everything that it's ever absorbed and, different things and people from different species as in different supernatural groups, but also different, males, females, different ethnicities and stuff like that. So I just thought that was kind of like a fascinating, interesting aspect to that whole situation. So Vardamus doesn't, or rather Clark doesn't keep up his fraud too long because obviously he's pushing Josie to kind of push all her negative emotions into like this trident weapon and everything. And obviously like he has to kind of keep up his illusion because like as she's using like his magic to siphon his magic to kind of perform the spell, his illusion is kind of faltering. So I guess it's kind of interesting. The fact is he can use magic and stuff, but I guess the ring in general gives you the ability to use magic regardless because we see Hope using it later on when she's handcuffed and can't use magic. So the ring is meant to make it seem like he's a witch, but he's not one. It just allows him, because I was always wondering what that kind of represents. So it's like, because you have to be a witch to be able to do, well, yes, you have to be a witch to be able to do magic like that. So like the ring, which I'm curious like where he got that. Maybe it was something Malivore had, maybe it's something he picked up, but it just allows you to use magic. So I'm also curious like why he picked a particular form he picked of Vardamus. Was it just some random form he picked, or was that actually someone else that actually existed that he just killed and took their form? Maybe it was just some regular Joe Schmo that he found the moment he escaped Malivore, but either way. So there's that side of things. Then there's the other side of things I thought was kind of pretty neat is like obviously like fake Landon is talking to Hope and everything and he's kind of running his mouth and everything. He's like, yeah, kind of talking about his fears and stuff like that. Hope is like, maybe we should, just practice being quiet. And it's like, but for him, he's like, I'm not talking too much because it sounds like I'm talking much. You can tell me if I'm talking too much. But it's just for him, it's like, like I said, I think despite everything, Hope is still it feels nice because once again, Landon's not really talking to her to have this other Landon who is kind of his subconscious really talking to her. I think it makes her feel like she is talking to Landon. And I like that fake Landon is because it's like, yeah, the fact of the matter is I can admit that Landon's being a coward because the fact of the matter is like I'm the side of him that's willing to say what he needs to say. So the fact of the matter is even if he's not willing to say it, I'll say what's really there in his heart, whether he's too much of a coward to really admit it or not. And he's like, the fact of the matter is it okay, like for the amount of time I have left, as long as we're staying here, can we hold hands? And they hold hands. I'm like, oh, that's so adorable. But then Landon's nearby, and I think for him it was a thing of like, I think there was a part of him that's been fighting it so long, not willing and wanting to admit that was a part of like, because I think it's a thing of like not wanting to hurt either one of them, because I think because his subconscious is drawn more to Hope because that was his first love and everything. Because to be fair, he's been in love with Hope for a very long time, and Hope was in love with him before. Even like obviously we got peeks into that during the originals when they met near the end of the series and everything. Well, we got introduced to them meeting at the end of the series. They already kind of knew each other already, but regardless. that feeling and that bond is already so strong. And I think for him, because he was afraid of admitting that, because it would have been hurting Josie, because he would, he needed to figure things out. But I think he already knew where things stood between him and everyone else. He knew where his mindset, where his heart went more towards hope. But I think just because he didn't want to admit it, because it meant, like I said, hurting Josie. So then you had the whole situation with Raphael and the Sphinx, where it's like the Sphinx itself it wasn't a guardian of oracles and stuff like that. It itself is an oracle. So you ask it a question, it will know. It's like, I can't lie to you. So it's like, if you stay here, it's like Landon will always be in trouble. So you have to leave, which Raphael's trying to convince Landon to. Because Landon was like, if I go in there and I die, then it'll kind of lose its whole thing of like, oh, it's supposed to come get me. So that was kind of the whole point. But Raphael stops him, because it's like, the fact of the matter is, it's not a solution. Because it's like, yeah, you can come back to life, but that shouldn't. I mean, because it's interesting, because I'm curious to see what ends up happening with that. Because if you don't, let's not forget, I mean, that was a different circumstance, but there were consequences for Alark from dying so often. Like, obviously he had the ring to constantly bring him back to life, but obviously the bad part was that basically his soul got possessed by like a serial killer or something like that. Like, I forgot whether it was like his soul got darkened because he did, every time he died, a little bit of like, I think it was like something else kind of possessed him, like something kind of took a hitch back on with him. Or I think in general, I think it was just he went mad from dying all those times. Like, eventually it's going to take a toll on your mind, the whole situation. I think that's what it really was. But I'm wondering if it's the same thing going to happen to Landon, because we do see that Landon was able to piece stuff back together about hope every time he died. So there's something in his subconscious that kind of snaps back into place, but who's to say it doesn't snap completely out of place because of that? I mean, especially considering who your family is. Your dad is Malivore, your brother is Clark, not the most stable family, so there might be some underlining issues there that might kind of snap out of place with all the times you die. Like I said, that's a story element they haven't really brought back since the whole Alark thing, because that was kind of like no more using those rings to keep people from dying type of thing, because they have such a backlash. So I'm curious, could that be a storyline that they kind of circle back into this case and make it kind of apply to Landon, that every time that he dies and comes back? I don't know. Because I would assume, because like Phoenix has kind of rise from the ashes and just come back normal. But once again, we don't know like whether there is a limited amount of times he can come back, whether there are any ramifications from him doing it. I mean, to be fair, it kind of goes against the nature of things. But to be fair, he's a Phoenix, so he kind of breaks that exception, So, he is the exception to that rule. So, we'll see in the long run whether anything really comes of that. But I love that Lizzie's leading fake Landon down to the Sphinx and everything, and it's like, okay. She's like, yeah, you're gonna have to go. Like, are you ready? He's like, are you talking about? You're making it seem like I should be happy and happy. Oh, we're having a fun time. This is about to get gnarly and be like very brutal, and it's going to be my death. It's like, go for it. And it's like, oh, they're standing there, and the Sphinx is like, yep, I have no interest in you. And Landon's like, yes, survived. Yeah. He was just getting super hyped about the fact is that the Sphinx didn't want him. But then it turns out like, okay, so the Sphinx doesn't want him, but that doesn't make any sense. Malivore always sends people to come after Landon, so it's like, what is this all about? Then at the same time, there's a whole situation of Clark, and it's interesting. Like, basically, it's so like, obviously he's so driven by his father of like, yeah, I got to do what my father wants me to do. But it's like, oh, I thought we were on good terms, but my dad kind of gave me the middle finger as I was leaving. Basically, he put Clark in a position where his body isn't 100% stable. That basically he would need to eat people and other supernatural creatures. And so I was like, okay, so that's what that was about, him eating that thing that hunts werewolves. I was like, okay, I was wondering like what that all was about, but I thought like, I was like, oh, maybe there's something, I wasn't sure what to make of it, but it's like, okay, so that makes sense. So he only has a limited amount of time. It was his dad's way of kind of putting him on a clock to be like, yeah, you have only a limited amount of time, so you better jump on it really quickly to kind of like get this whole situation with your brother resolved, and more so than anything taking Hope out. But for him, he decides, like, rather than taking Hope out, why not I become Hope? That way he's going to put his subconscious in her mind, and that way he can destroy his father once and for all and be 100% free from him. So it's kind of crazy to think that was your plan the entire time. But to be fair, it's also because it's also his way to get back at Hope, because it's like, oh, you left me behind. It's like, to be fair, dude, you were a piece of crap. There's no way she was going to trust you. But for him, it's like, I was actually trying to do good. I was trying to look after you and everything. But it's like, well, if I want to get out of here, I can't bring you along. I mean, there was no, but maybe for him, it's like, if we stuck it down, we could have found a solution. It's like, I wouldn't worry about it too much, all kind of, so it's like, but it's probably that thing of like, because you left me behind, I became the villain, I did blah, blah, blah. I got no sympathy for you, Clark. So he's trying to hunt her down the entire time. And I thought it was pretty smart using, he didn't even realize that she had slipped the ring off of him and she was using it to create an illusion around. I thought that was pretty genius, actually. I was like, holy crap. I was like, whoa, how did she do that? So that was pretty dope. Obviously, she's at the school alone because everyone else has already left. But lo and behold, who shows up? Landon to save the day. It's like, in all honesty, he was kicking Clark's ass a little bit too. I was like, yo! And I think that's so interesting too. It's like the whole thing of like, I don't see why dad looks into you so much. It's like, sure, you can come back from the dead, but other than that, you're still powerless. Which part of me wonders, are we going to see him kind of go all like, oh God, what would be a great reference to be? Well, since it's CW, maybe he'll go all Firestorm is kind of what I'm thinking. Because maybe as a Phoenix, he can learn to harness that fire. That's kind of something I've thought about just for a different story I've had in my mind about like one of the main characters being a Phoenix. That they can kind of control fire in itself. Not only the whole being resurrected thing, but also like they can straight up just like summon fire to kind of utilize it as a own because like it's there within them. So I'm wondering if they're setting that up potentially as being something Landon can do, because the make up for the fact is that he doesn't have like superhuman strength. He doesn't have any magic. All he has is the ability to come back to life, which, hey, that has its benefits. Ask Nathan from Misfits. I mean, granted, Nathan didn't have that ability forever because he ended up, spoiler, selling it. But regardless, that's a whole tangent in itself. But it's just interesting. And it's like, to protect the person he cares about, it's like, okay, you don't want Hope, you want me. I'm kind of a better like constellation prize. And he stabs him, but it turns out it's the golem Landon and not the real Landon. Because for him, the only thing that matters, because he is driven by, he is Landon's subconscious, he's unfiltered. So the only thing he cared about was protecting Hope. So if he meant, it's like, well, the fact of the matter is you're going to be marked for death. So it's like now that he's in that, which has got to be awkward and crazy and weird because now. So I think that's such an interesting thing because obviously we know Landon ends up leaving with Raphael, which we'll get to that in a second, but technically he's still going to be around. It's kind of similar to how Charlie looks like Amaya. It's that very similar situation. So I think it's kind of something like that where it's like technically it's going to be interesting because the actor who plays Landon's going to be playing the same character but kind of differently, so that's going to be interesting to kind of do that. I think that's going to be a bit fun, but especially going to be a complicated thing for both Josie and Hope because it's like, yeah, and I guess like, well, that subconscious that was Landon's is completely gone. All that's left is Clark, and now Clark just looks like Landon now, so that's a whole thing in itself. And he doesn't have the benefit of being the Phoenix or anything like that, so he's just kind of stuck as basically a regular human at this point, so that's interesting. Not unless we end up finding out there is some more to that. No, because he's a golem, so he's supposed to like dissolve inside of Malivore. That's kind of the whole point anyway. So, but regardless. But since I brought Landon up, he decided to leave because for him, it's like, the fact is all I do is cause pain to everyone around me. The fact of the matter is, like, I'm the issue. Like, all these monsters coming after me, all this hurt that's come around between Hope and Josie, it's like I'm the cause of that. No one else is. So I need to leave the kind of, I don't know if you guys will ever forgive me. Maybe you will, but in his own way, this was his way doing what he believed was best for everyone. Just like Hope was doing what she thought was best for everyone. So, Hope was even saying like she didn't want to stay at the school if it meant like causing Josie so much more pain. So it's like, if you don't want me to be here, I won't be here. But Josie's like, the fact is Landon made his decisions. We can make our own too, because like, this is your home. This is where you belong. Because for Hope, she had talked about the fact is that she missed everything, like classes. She missed Lizzie being mean to her, and the fact that she missed Josie, So I thought that was, sweet. And obviously it's going to take a while, but I think, Josie's on her way to recovery and everything. So, and obviously Raphael's going with Landon, which obviously that last thing that the Sphinx said kind of got me thinking, because obviously it turns out the reason why he wasn't after Landon was because he's not working for Malivore. Something or someone much worse. Which is kind of interesting to think, considering the fact that Malivore is as dangerous as it is, that there's something already. That's interesting that we're already setting up that Malivore is not even the main. Because it seemed like, I was curious, like the red robe thing, were those something separate from Malivore, or is that the same? It's like, nope, that is 100% something else. I'm wondering, is that going to cross over in the fact is that they're going to use Malivore as a means to accomplish whatever the hell they're up to, but they're the whatever, because remember there's at least two of them, and they summoned the Sphinx, and I guess the whole point was to get Raphael and Landon away, like, so that was the real mission. And it even said this thing of like, I'll be seeing you soon, which meant, I guess, because it kills itself to kind of get itself out of there, but I guess it can always come back, and at some point it is going to come back. I thought that was kind of interesting. I guess the Sphinx, maybe it's just because of the way the Sphinx works, or maybe whoever brought this thing back, it won't go back to Malivore because it's no longer Malivore's, it's whoever did that, because obviously the zombie is still at play here, and it's dragging Clark's body, which, okay, so what's that for? Is this part of the spell or whatever? Because obviously they've been killing regular people too and using them for what? Once again, I don't know. It has to be part of some spell. I'm curious who it is underneath that hood. Is it someone that escaped Malivore too, or is it something else entirely? We'll ultimately kind of have to wait and see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode, because these are some very interesting developments, especially now the school is without a headmaster. Now, obviously, the whole Sebastian thing, I'm sure we're going to circle back to that next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of Evil. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, we have David in a very interesting situation. Him as well as the other, like, priest or whatever that were there during Caroline's exorcism are being sued by Caroline, because basically subsequently saying, because obviously we had, Kurt and Kristen, they are being like, oh, this isn't, Caroline needs psychological help, not an exorcism, but they went through with the exorcism, so now she's suing them, which is interesting because the last time we saw her, it seemed like, oh, she was okay, but I guess subsequently after like a week or so after that, apparently things got worse. When it first came up that like, oh, he was being sued, I was like, is this Leland? But then it turns out, no, it's Caroline. But then immediately my brain went like, is this actually some situation of like, she's actually playing along with this, trying to get some money or something, like she was saved and helped. But I mean, because the fact of the matter is they were only brought in because your husband kind of signed off on this, but at the same time, all the information that was presented to her afterwards, the fact is the way she was feeling, she felt nauseous, she was depressed, kind of suicidal and stuff like that. So it kind of leans itself to be like, okay, it's a byproduct of all that. There's a lot going into this. One, basically, the church is bringing in their fixer, Renee, who apparently her and David have a connection. Turns out that connection is Julia. Julia was Renee's sister, and so that's an interesting situation. We'll kind of elaborate on that more later on, but I love it because like it's a whole situation of, obviously David went to Kristen first because it's like, oh, I need to, get our story straight about the whole, like, how much we disagreed, but Kristen immediately shut that down and like, you need to get a lawyer immediately, because if they ask me about any conversations we had up to this point, at this point, it could just be like, oh, like whether or not I've been subpoenaed or not. But if they ask me something, obviously Kristen, upholds, the law and everything. So it's like, she's a professional. If they ask her something, she's going to tell the truth. So she's asking David, like, yo, you better get you a lawyer right now. Don't talk too much further about this with me, because I will be legally obligated to bring it up. So, and I think it kind of put David in this awkward thing of like situation, because it's like, oh, I want to, because Kristen has kind of been that person he could, lean on and kind of count on. So not being able to count on her in this situation, I think was kind of something he wasn't 100% used to. So, but obviously Renee's getting brought into this. She wants to talk to Kristen, and I love she meets Ben, and it's like, oh, Ben, so what do you do with the church? He's like, I'm a contractor, and she's like, no, it's seriously. He's like, no, seriously. She's like, okay. And I did like her and Kristen's little like back and forth. Apparently they're going up against a lawyer. Her name is Lemonhead. Interestingly enough, I'm blanking on her character's name. It's Anna McCann. Not Anna McCann. What's her name from The Blacklist? She was in the previous season of The Blacklist. So I was like, oh, that's the most recent thing. But also because I went back a little while back and rewatched Time After Time. She was in Time After Time as well. So that was just kind of an interesting quote. But basically, she plays Lemonhead. And I love that when Kristen kind of gives a very short, it's like, oh, did your lawyer prepare you for this? It's like, yes. What did she tell you? To give short and concise answers. What did she tell? Did she tell you about me ahead of time? Yes. What did she say? That your name was Lemonhead because you have an issue with your last name and you're kind of taking it out on other people or something like that. And Renee is kind of laughing, and Lemonhead did not appreciate that. It seemed like there's definitely something there. Like they might have crossed paths in the past before. Lemonhead and Renee. I just thought that was kind of an interesting element to the whole episode in that regard. I was like, holy crap. But obviously things don't look good. Obviously Kristen kind of gives her perspective on everything, and she is trying to give things every nice and precise. But the complicated thing is, it's a complicated situation because it's like, she doesn't believe in all this demonic possession and stuff like that. So obviously the entire time Lemonhead's trying to undermine her thing of like, oh, you worked as a psychiatrist. She's like, no, like I still work as that. I've been working for that for 7 years. Even with this new job, my position hasn't necessarily changed. I'm here to be completely and utterly unbiased. That's kind of the whole point and everything. But obviously when Lemonhead was on David, she kind of ripped him apart because it's like, okay, basically bringing up David's past, and we really get a bigger insight to it. Obviously his drug addiction kind of ran deeper. He tried to make it seem like he didn't have an issue, but he did. He got caught with possession of cocaine. Apparently he was a sex addict, but that's like, it's a thing of like he found religion and it kind of shifted everything for him. It kind of made him a better person. So I think that's also why he's so devoted to this whole thing, because it's like, because for him it was an opportunity to, it allowed him to grow. And I'm wondering, is that how he actually met Julia? Because it turns out like Julia's like deathbed wish was to basically have Renee kind of work with the church, hence why she's kind of the church's fixer and kind of works as their lawyer, but more so their fixer if anything. So I thought that was such a fascinating thing. So I'm assuming that must mean that Julia must have been a religious person. And so being maybe she's the one that kind of helped David she helped with maybe his addiction stuff. Maybe she was a part of the church and kind of brought him in, and he continues on the church because of her, but also because of what it did. It helped him. But it turns out Renee ended up dropping some interesting information where she was like, David, I have a crush on you since I met you. And the fact of the matter is I stayed away from you and my sister because it hurt too much, So tries to make moves on David because it's kind of like, we can do something now, because I think probably at first it's like, well, my sister was around and I knew there was something between you two, so it's like I didn't want to kind of get in the middle of that, but now she's gone, like we don't have to fight that, because it's like, I think about you, do you think about me? And then David's just kind of like, yeah, she gets all close and everything. I'm like, wow. Once again, this show gets so hot and steamy and stuff like that, but not just that, just like the horror elements and just like the craziness that goes on in the show. I still can't believe this is a CBS show. It feels like this should be like a Showtime show. I don't know why. It just, aspects about the show just don't feel like CBS. Like I've said it time and time again, and it feels more and more accurate with every episode that passes. But once again, my tangent and me going on the tangent and whatnot. But she says an interesting thing that I think is kind of interesting. Is like, you can serve the church without being married to it. Because obviously, because he's trying to become a priest and everything, like that means like not having sex. But I think it also stems from the fact is obviously he has a bit of a sex addiction. So I think for him, he's afraid to even tempt that, because he's like, if I go down that route, it's going to be an ugly thing of like, snowball from there. Which that's a whole complicated thing in itself, because obviously him and Kristen definitely like each other, but they're kind of fighting. I even love when David came over, Kristen's like, hey, yeah, I'm good, I'm fine. Plus my husband's here. And David's like, oh, okay, and it was quickly dozed over. The fact is that whole thing between her and her husband, her still being high and everything, and it's like, oh, she has David's jacket, she's taking off the jacket and she's about to take off the shirt, but she's too high to really do it. Puts the jacket in his hoodie or whatever in a basket, but then like, because Andy was bringing up so many questions, she put it, because obviously I don't think he knows about David, because the only person he really hears so much about is Ben. Like, I don't know if the girls have really been introduced to David like that, have they? I don't think they have. I think David's met the kids. I think so. I know Ben definitely spent the most time with him, and obviously seeing Ben the Magnificent, it's like, so who's this Ben dude? What's he doing spending so much time with my children type of situation? Like, we got the glimpses of that last episode, and even there was even a moment where it's like, it's like, oh, should I be worried about this, Ben guy? Which even, Kristen's like, what? No, it's nothing like that, because once again, if anything, it's her and David, but obviously, like, I don't think he's aware of David. I think he's aware of Ben, but regardless, I just thought that was kind of an interesting situation. But regardless, getting back to this, lawsuit and everything, I thought it was pretty interesting when Kristen kind of got the idea to kind of approach this situation differently. Rather than being defensive about being on a defense, let's be on an offense. And so basically to try to undermine, like, the therapist that she went to after the exorcism and everything, trying to make it seem like the medication he had her on was the issue, not the exorcism itself, because she was happy and healthy, obviously, like, after the exorcism, but then it wasn't until she went on the medication that he prescribed her that this shift happened in her. And once again, the entire episode, I'm still waiting to be like, Caroline is about to drop, like, because it just, like, the look on her face and stuff like that, I couldn't tell whether that was someone who was like, oh, you hurt me and you did this to me, or was this was someone that's like, oh, I'm about to get paid type. Like, I couldn't really tell what her, but it seems like she was sincere about, like, oh, she was going through a lot and she was kind of associating it with the exorcism and everything. But it turns out this particular doctor, because Kurt had, was brought, to kind of testify and everything. It was like, okay, so the medication that the doctor gave her was a cheaper version, but it was also one that had a whole bunch of side effects. There was actually another medication that could help her particular situation without the negative side effects. So, and it also turns out that that particular doctor that prescribed her the medication had actually written a study or something about not doing the exact thing that he was doing because it could be an issue. So it basically undermines his entire testimony, because basically it recognizes him as a hypocrite, because he's literally doing the thing that himself as a trained professional wrote that you shouldn't do. So that kind of blows up Lemon's Head's case, which I wonder why. I mean, I think maybe in her mind she's like, yeah, I'm looking after Caroline, so it's hard to say whether it's like, oh, you're being a decent lawyer, or is it just because you're a lawyer that hates to lose. It's hard to say, because she just seemed like, oh yeah, I'm glad that the church can make a to pay Caroline's medical bills. So I don't know whether it was her trying to beat the goodness of her heart, being like, I know the church is wrong in this situation, and maybe she has a personal bias against the church, because even she was kind of pushing the whole angle for Kristen, but Kristen was like, I'm an atheist, that has nothing to do with this particular situation. I keep my job as unbiased as possible, or tried to for her, all she cared about was the truth, and that was kind of a point she was trying to make. But Lemonhead is like, oh, we'll see. Like, she seems super aggro, and like I said, that's why I don't know whether she has an issue against the church, or was it just because she didn't like Renee or Kristen, or it might just be the fact that she feels like they're getting away with something, and maybe because the church has a tendency to get away with stuff, so maybe that's the real byproduct of this whole thing of like where all her strong feelings come from. But we'll see. But luckily everything did kind of like all the church had to do was pay Caroline's medical bills, because she dropped kind of the lawsuit and just, or rather wanted to settle, because I think they were aiming for like $8 million before taking this to church, was kind of where things were. But now it's like, yeah, everything is said and done. So Renee's actually really, really good at her job. But even she was like, I can't take 100% credit, because Kristen kind of played a role in all of this as well. So I thought that was kind of neat. There's also another element to this episode I'm curious about. That damn cat. I love that we see the cat like twice in the episode, and then just the rest of the episode, all you do is hear him, just because he's just like screeching like that stuff. I'm like, what is up with that? And because even Kristen's like, yeah, it just seems like the cat hates her. It's not a demonic cat, it just hates me. And it's like, why is that? The fact is, it was holding on to David's jacket and everything, and it makes me go like, maybe there's something to that. Maybe not. Maybe you can look at it as maybe it's a sign of something to come, or maybe not. I don't know. I just think it's also supposed to be some like middle finger to kind of almost like psychologically, maybe it's meant to be a thing of almost kind of making Kristen feel bad, because it's like, well, her husband and everything, but obviously she's had thoughts about David. I'm surprised we didn't see George this episode. Just with her husband back and everything, I thought we definitely would have seen some George in this episode. I'm surprised. But, who knows? Like, things could get more complicated later on, and George might pop up in, some of her dreams. It'd be kind of interesting if George actually kind of popped up in Andy's dream as well. Because obviously he popped up in, wasn't it Laura's dream? So, it doesn't mean it can't happen. So I'm curious to see kind of what happens on that front. But, that's me thinking ahead. I don't think it's going to change anything, but I'm curious what, like, obviously Kristen learning more about David like that through, this lawsuit and everything, like learning about his addiction. Like, she knew a little bit, but like to hear it kind of all laid out like that stuff David didn't want to share with anyone. Obviously, that's something he didn't bring up with the church or anyone that, like, oh, it's like the church sent me to do this. It's like, well, if Caroline knew that you had that history, do you think she would have let you perform an exorcism on her and everything? Which I also love the fact is, it's like, well, because I'm about to say they never pointed out any of the other stuff in the recordings of like the demonic stuff she said or did, but it's like, well, the argument will be made that like, oh, that was just her having a psychotic break. But that's the thing. It's like if you're religious, you'll look at it as a demon possession. You're not, you'll look at it as a psychotic, and that's the whole point of this. Like, insanity can look a lot like possession, and possession can look a lot like insanity. That's kind of the whole point of this. That was something David made clear from the beginning when he brought Kristen in on board all of this. But regardless, I'm just curious. Like, obviously, like Andy being back kind of complicates their relationship. I think she's going to not try to be as close to David because I think she feels a little bad about it, and she probably doesn't want to send the wrong signals, especially to Andy. But I'm curious, is any of that going to change your opinion of David? Because I think it's like, well, people are allowed to change and grow. But obviously, probably the thought is that all those addictions are there. He still has to work on it. Like, addiction isn't something that's resolved overnight. It's an everyday thing. And obviously, he has his visions because he takes a little to kind of have his vision. So it might be a situation of it's still a slippery slope. Like, obviously, he'll start off doing that. But who's to say it won't spiral out to be more later down the road? So, so I think it might color her vision a little bit differently when she looks at David. Maybe not. Maybe she'll look at it as like, well, look at who he is right now. That's what matters most. He has overcome and everything. Like, yes, it's going to be still a struggle, but I'm not going to judge him for it because that's my friend, that's my colleague. So, we'll see in the long run. There was an interesting aspect at the end where Andy's trying to be like, oh, I get why you took this new job and everything. Oh, it's very dangerous and stuff like that. But saying that she's basically doing transference, that basically all the feelings that she would get from climbing, now that she's back here, she's putting it all into this job. And it's like, hey, but now it's your turn. I'm going to stay here and be dad. You can go do the climbing thing and stuff like that, which I personally take that as kind of like, I think that's a little messed up for you, just assuming that that's what she wants. It seems like you're doing a little projecting yourself of just assuming you know what she wants. And I think that's going to be something Kristen's going to be figuring out is this what she wants to do? Is this where she wants to be? She does legitimately enjoy, because for her, it's like there's so many like, surprises with this job and everything. So it's like maybe climbing might not be something too, because obviously being in this position allows her to be there for her kids. I mean, to be fair, she was here this entire time with her kids when you were gone. So for her, that might be something she might not be willing to kind of break away from. I'm curious to see what she does in the long run, because I think this next case is going to play a big role in deciding, maybe it's like, maybe this would be my last case, and maybe I will, Andy suggested me taking obviously I think it's going to be a thing of Ben, and obviously David will be like, oh, well, we'll miss having you around, but if this is what you decided you want to do, then, we'll find someone else to kind of fit that role, so I'm curious to see what Kristen kind of ends up doing, because there's still a lot. Obviously, she doesn't know. It was never revealed, but I guarantee you her mom is still hooking up with Leland, because we saw them hook up before, but obviously like last episode Andy caught her having sex with someone, but we never got to see who. And like, oh, don't tell Kristen. It's like, you don't want Kristen to know for one particular reason. Well, because it's Leland, but also most likely it could her thought process could be like, oh, she was pissed about Leland, if any boyfriend of mine would never be good enough, yada yada yada, that type of thing. But we'll see, kind of, because I think she wouldn't be so willing to leave her family behind, especially when so much other stuff is going on like that. So there's that. Then there's the other side of the story, which involves Leland and that Sebastian dude yet again, and it's kind of like pushing him to kind of be like as if, so like go to this gym that's mainly ladies and point their finger and pretend like you're shooting a gun, as if, then show that you have the courage. I'm like, okay, so you're definitely setting the stage for making him try to prepare him for a shooting, which I'm like, oh, this is just shitty. This is just terrible. And obviously Leland's pushing him because he's fighting someone he knows that is, got this anger and weak enough to be manipulated into thinking like, oh, this is, kind of giving into their like anger and darkness, essentially. I mean, that's what Leland's there to do. He's there to, stroke the flames, so So there's that, and the fact is they're getting so excited about it. He brings in this dude Adam. He's like, yeah, he's one of the 59 on trust. I'm like, oh, okay. Obviously, so that makes him one of the 60. So it's like, okay, train Sebastian how to use a gun. Which Sebastian uses the gun. He really likes. He enjoys. It's like, oh, this is so awesome. And then it's like, oh man, you've graduated. Ha ha ha. No more as if. And then Leland was like, you know what? We're gonna move this up. The fact of the matter is, I want you to hit this. It's like the moment he kept being like, oh, no, let's change the target to something else. It can't be that workout gym because obviously they've already caught attention to you, heightened security and everything. I was like, because of the other aspect of this episode, I was like, he's going to choose a courtroom or something, isn't it? And it's going to lead to like that. I thought it was going to be kind of connected to our main characters. Turns out not. Well, yes, but no, it's not a courtroom. It's a prayer group led by none other than David. I was like, oh, okay, so this is your way to kind of get David too. I mean, it seems like he's more so supposed to be targeting women, but maybe it's supposed to be kind of like a little thing to kind of break David just a little bit more. So I thought that was kind of, messed up. And so it's like, okay. So what's interesting is what ended up happening is like, okay, so the fact of the matter is David went to his room and lo and behold, who's there? Renee. And Renee's like, oh, I'm not leaving until you touch me, which I'm once again, that sounds like something that wouldn't be on CBS. That sounds like, once again, some Showtime stuff. Hell, maybe Cinemax, but definitely some show. Like, just that line, and he just sits on the bed. It's like, well, is that going to turn into something? I mean, I'm sure it probably makes you feel a little weird and awkward because, you do think about it, but it's also like, that's the sister of someone you cared about, so it's kind of that weird thing. And now that Julia's gone, like, there's that. Then there's also the Kristen thing, which Kristen's got the whole Andy situation, which obviously, once again, that's her husband, but obviously, like, David and Kristen definitely like each other, but it's like, she's in a committed relationship. He's technically in a committed relationship with God, but that's also getting complicated because he's being tempted by Renee. But I think what's interesting, though, is Renee being there would have meant that he would have missed the prayer group, so the prayer group would have gotten together. Maybe not. That would have been the whole thing. And then you had the whole thing of like Sebastian messing with the guns and everything. And the moment he starts messing with the pistols, I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, you're going to shoot yourself, aren't you? The moment he blew on the first pistol, I was like, oh, you're going to mess around and shoot yourself. And he blows on the second one, and I turned away from the screen just as he shot himself. I was like, ooh, yeah. I was like, I honestly think that is some major, like, crazy ass divine intervention. It's like, well, the whole Renee trying to seduce David thing is happening while Sebastian ends up shooting himself, which that pissed Leland off because it was like, you weakling, you pathetic. It's like he put so much time and effort into him and it literally all went down the drain. It was like, which it sucks that he died, but it's like at the same time, it's like I said, that was divine intervention because it's like he would have hurt so many more people. So, maybe David's got someone looking out for him, the big man in the sky type of situation, like I said, if that's your thing. But I just thought that was kind of interesting. But Leland flips out and he's like, you know what? I'm going to find me another incel. So he's going through a long list of like, okay, so I doubt Sebastian was the first one because obviously he hooked Sebastian up with all those other incels to kind of talk about like how they would handle things. So I doubt that was the first, but I think Sebastian was the one that he was really putting his efforts in. I think he felt something in Sebastian's like, yeah, that's a 1 out of 50 type of situation of like, yeah, I can really push him to cross the line and do something super shitty and terrible. Well, now he's got to find someone else to kind of fit that profile. So quite the interesting turn of events. So I'm glad to see Leland's plans literally fall apart like that, and literally seeing him fall apart, pissed off because, like I said, it's just your target was David, and just things didn't work out, the way you kind of planned and hoped that it would. So, a lot of interesting things. I'm curious to see where ultimately all this kind of takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.